Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cliff, not a physical one, but a cliff made entirely of perception. Behind you lies your entire life, your beliefs, your memories, your traumas, your victories. All of it, meticulously narrated by an inner voice you never chose. Before you? A vast, silent abyss. It's terrifying because there are no labels, no definitions, no story. Just pure, unfiltered experience. Raw reality. And then it hits you. You have never actually touched reality. Not once. Every emotion you've felt, every decision you've made, every identity you've worn, it all passed through a filter first. A filter made not of neurons or instincts, but of words. Think about that. You didn't feel heartbreak. You called it heartbreak. And the moment you did, it bled red and tragic. You didn't become a failure. You were told, or told yourself, you failed. And suddenly your body reacted with shame, your mind crumbled with doubt, and your future rewrote itself as something smaller. But what if none of that was real? What if what you call reality is just a story your language trapped you in? There's a quiet tyranny at play, more subtle than propaganda, more personal than politics. It's the words you use when you talk to yourself in the shower. The labels you carry like scars on your identity. The invisible prison bars etched with phrases like, I can't, I'm not enough. Or, that's just who I am. Who gave you those words? Did you choose them? Or were they handed down, like inherited wounds, from parents, teachers, media, religion, and a society obsessed with naming, judging, and reducing? From the moment you learned to speak, you began to lose touch with reality. Not because speech is evil, but because speech creates structure. Structure becomes habit. Habit becomes belief. And belief becomes the world. Words can liberate. They can inspire revolutions and awaken sleeping giants within us. But words can also lie. And the most dangerous lies are not the ones shouted from podiums. They're the quiet phrases whispered in your mind at 3 a.m. I'm broken. I'm too late. This is just how life is. But who decided that? Would the same moment feel different if it had a different name? Pain becomes trauma when it's chronicled. Love becomes possession when it's defined. Freedom becomes anxiety when you're told what success should look like. Now consider this. There are entire tribes in the Amazon with no word for future. For them, life happens in a continuous present. No rushing, no regret. Just presence. There are languages where I doesn't exist, only we. The very structure of self is collective. There are dialects where emotions aren't things to be managed. They're sacred weather passing through the soul. So what happens to you when your language is impoverished? When your internal dialogue is colonized by fear, scarcity, shame? You begin to live someone else's life. You start calling your curiosity distraction. Your gentleness becomes weakness. Your hunger for more becomes greed. And the world, once mysterious and alive, becomes a spreadsheet of to-do lists, job titles, and algorithms. We worship the mind, yet forget that the mind is often just an echo chamber of repeated language. Your thoughts? Mostly recycled words, overheard and reworded, packaged by fear or fantasy. What if the words you use are not describing your life, but creating it, not metaphorically, literally? A child told she's sensitive grows cautious with her empathy. A boy told he's difficult learns to mistrust his passion. A woman praised for being selfless learns to disappear. These are not just stories. These are realities engineered by language. So the question is not, do words matter? The question is, what if they're everything? If words are the lens, and you've never questioned the glass, how can you ever be sure you're seeing clearly? What if freedom isn't a matter of changing your circumstances, but of changing your vocabulary? Not just the words you speak aloud, but the ones you think with. Not just affirmations on a vision board, but the silent scripts that run your life like hidden code. I'm tired, or my soul is longing, I failed, or I experimented, I'm lost, or I'm on a detour the map doesn't show. Same events, different worlds. So here you are, standing at the cliff again. Behind you, a life you've named and framed with borrowed phrases. Ahead of you, the possibility of naming things differently, of seeing without labels, of reclaiming the words that made you. But are you brave enough to look deeper? Because once you realize that your mind is speaking a language someone else taught you, you begin to wonder, who am I beneath the words? Let's go there. Here's the paradox. The more we name things, the more we lose them. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But how do we make the unconscious conscious? We do it through words. Through language, we reach into the shadow, the part of ourselves we've rejected, forgotten, or deemed too dangerous to love. But here's the catch. If the words we use are already infected with fear, judgment, or false morality, then even our healing becomes a distortion. Language is not just a bridge to truth, it can also be a barrier. Take addiction. Gabor Mate, a physician and trauma expert, has spent decades unpacking the human pain behind addiction, and he says this clearly: addiction is not a disease. It's an adaptation. But society doesn't call it that. Society uses words like junkie, loser, or even broken. And when you name a person with those words, you don't just describe them, you define them. You tell them who they are, and more dangerously, who they are not allowed to become. The same applies to anxiety. We don't just feel overwhelmed, we say we're disordered. We don't just seek connection, we say we're needy. We don't just long for purpose, we call it midlife crisis. So we medicate the symptoms and miss the soul. Because somewhere along the way, we stopped asking, where did these words come from? The invisible origin of your vocabulary, your personal language, your inner voice, was built during your most vulnerable years. The child who was told, "Don't cry, you're being dramatic," doesn't grow up emotionally strong. They grow up emotionally numb. The teenager who heard, "You'll never make it unless you work harder," doesn't grow up ambitious. They grow up anxiously addicted to productivity. The adult who was taught that self-love is selfish doesn't become kind to others. They become a ghost to themselves. Words were your first cage, and like any cage, the most dangerous kind is the one that looks like home. Why your brain believes your words. Neuroscience tells us this. The human brain doesn't just process language, it internalizes it. When you say something to yourself, especially repeatedly, your brain physically rewires itself to believe it. Neural pathways strengthen. Hormonal reactions shift. Even your immune system changes in response to belief. So when you say, "I'm not good enough," your body actually prepares for rejection. When you tell yourself, "I'm stuck," your mind closes off to creative possibilities. When you say, "I always mess things up," you literally program your brain to look for failure. This isn't spirituality. This is neuroplasticity. But here's where it gets deeper. Nietzsche, Language and the Fiction of Reality. Friedrich Nietzsche, often seen as the rebel philosopher, warned us that language is a trap. He said we mistake words for truths. We say, tree, and we forget that this word is not the living, breathing organism but a mere symbol. We say, truth, and assume it's universal. But truth, for Nietzsche, was a mobile army of metaphors, human-made, culture-bound, never objective. Now, think about what that means in your life. You say, "This is who I am." But is that true? Or is it just the label you've worn the longest? You say, "I'm an introvert, a workaholic, an anxious person." But maybe that's just the story you memorized to feel safe. Nietzsche reminds us that all language is metaphor. But we forgot it was a metaphor, and we started living as if it were a sentence. Sartre and the Dread of Definition. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, took this even further. He said, "You are not what you are. You are what you are not yet." In other words, your identity is always in flux. You're not a noun, you're a verb. You're not a person, you're a process. But society wants you boxed. Why? Because a person who has defined themselves can be controlled, marketed to, labeled, taxed, tracked, dismissed. A person who says, "I am this," can be sold a life that fits the label. But a person who says, "I don't know what I am, because I'm still becoming," terrifies the system. Sartre called this existential freedom, and he said most people run from it. They prefer the comfort of roles and titles, even if it kills their spirit. Why? Because naming yourself feels safer than becoming yourself. Your words are a mirror. So let's return to you. Every word you speak about yourself is a spell, in the original sense of the word. To spell is to shape reality with syllables. You've been spelling your reality for years, and now maybe it's time to break the spell. Maybe your sadness isn't depression, it's your soul rejecting a fake life. Maybe your burnout isn't laziness, it's your body saying no to systems that exploit. Maybe your confusion isn't weakness, it's the birth pang of a deeper self. But to see that, you must change the words you use, not superficially, not with hollow affirmations, but from the inside out. You must rewire your inner dictionary, and that starts with one act: noticing. Noticing when you say, I should, when you say, I can't, when you say, I'm just not that type of person. Every phrase you say without questioning is a doorway to your unconscious, and every doorway can be walked through. What Jung called the real work. Carl Jung said the real work of transformation is not becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Language is the trail of breadcrumbs leading you home, but only if you read between the words. Only if you dare to ask, every time you speak, is this me talking? Or my conditioning? So here we are. You've seen the cliff. You've questioned the script. You've looked language in the face and asked, who wrote this story I call my life? Now it's time for something even harder. It's time to rewrite it. But this is not about adding fluff words or self-help slogans. This is about reclaiming the words that were stolen from you. It's about learning to speak the language of your own soul again, before it was silenced, marketed, or medicated. Step 1. Unlearning the labels. Start here. Take inventory of every word you use to describe yourself. I'm a people pleaser. I'm bad at relationships. I'm too sensitive. I'm a high achiever. I'm just an overthinker. Pause. Where did these come from? Not just where in your life, but where in your pain. You see, every self-description is often a scar in disguise. You don't call yourself a people pleaser unless love once meant performance. You don't call yourself too sensitive unless someone made you believe that your empathy was a burden. You don't say overthinker unless your thoughts once kept you safe in a chaotic world. The words you use are echoes of survival strategies. So unlearning is not about deleting parts of you. It's about recognizing what was once useful is now imprisoning. Say it with me. This word once protected me, but I don't need it anymore. Now breathe. You've just taken your first step back home. Step 2. Choosing new mirrors. Here's a truth that will either free you or terrify you. You are allowed to rename yourself. This isn't about lying to yourself. It's about choosing a more accurate mirror. Instead of saying, I'm a mess, say, I'm in transition. Instead of, I'm needy, say, I'm wired for connection. Instead of, I'm lazy, try, I'm disconnected from what matters. This isn't semantics. It's neurobiology. When you change the story, you change the structure. When you choose new metaphors, your brain begins to wire toward new outcomes. When you rename your pain, it starts to release its grip. You are the author now, so write like your life depends on it, because it does. Step 3. Practicing linguistic mindfulness. Start to notice the little phrases. I should, I always, I'm just the kind of person who. Every time you use one of these, stop. Ask yourself, who said that first? Whose voice are you echoing? This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, becoming an integrated, whole self by confronting the unconscious patterns that drive us. Most people don't need to find themselves, they need to translate themselves. You are not a concept. You are not a category. You are a living process, emotional, evolving, expansive. But if you keep using the same 10 words to describe your entire inner world, how can you ever expect to grow? Step 4. Learning to speak in soul language. The soul doesn't speak in diagnosis. It speaks in poetry. The soul doesn't say, I'm depressed. It says, there's a heavy winter inside me. The soul doesn't say, I'm unlovable. It says, I forgot how to hold myself. The soul doesn't say, I'm stuck. It says, something sacred is gestating inside me. So if you want to speak to your soul, you need to learn its language. Not the language of logic, but the language of metaphor, rhythm, depth. Write. Speak. Create. Not to impress the world, but to meet yourself again. And when you do, you'll begin to feel seen. Not by others, but by you. Nietzsche's final whisper. Nietzsche once said, become who you are. But how? You begin by shedding the words that don't belong to you. You begin by questioning the scripts that feel too small for your spirit. You begin by rewriting your story in the language of someone who actually knows their worth. Nietzsche didn't mean you should become something better. He meant you should become something real. And that becoming, it begins not with action, but with language, not with ambition, but with honesty. The power of naming light. Don't just name your pain, start naming your light. You say, I'm broken. But can you also say, I'm resilient? You say, I overthink. But can you say, I'm deeply reflective? You say, I feel too much. But can you say, I'm beautifully attuned to life? Naming your darkness is brave, but naming your beauty? That's divine. Most people are more comfortable with shame than worth. But you're here now. You've seen the prison walls built by language, and now you hold the key. One final practice. Each morning, ask yourself this: what is the truest thing I can say about myself today? Not the most productive, not the most socially acceptable, not the most motivational, just the truest. It might be raw. I feel hollow, or tender. I miss someone I pretend I don't, or radiant. I'm finally ready to forgive myself. Say it out loud. Write it down. Let your body hear your truth in your own voice. You don't need healing that comes from outside. You need language that comes from within. Because once you start speaking from the soul, the world around you begins to shift. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You're not broken. You're becoming. So here's what I'll leave you with. Your suffering is not meaningless. Your confusion is not weakness. Your silence is not empty. These are just places where the old language has failed you. You're not broken. You're becoming. You're not lost. You're shedding old names. You're not too late. You're just now learning to speak. And when you do, when you finally speak not what they taught you, but what you know deep in your bones, that's when life begins. Not the life you were told to live, but the life you were meant to remember. So go ahead, speak, spell your name in truth, and let the world hear the sound of a soul finally set free.